Minnesota Department of Human Services logo, Child Care and Development Block Grant for license-exempt centers authorized for CCAP participation. Hello, my name is Reggie Wagner, and I am the Director of Licensing for the Minnesota Department of Human Services. I want to welcome you to this overview about important changes related to child care licensing that are being proposed in the 2017 legislative session. These changes are necessary because of federal changes to the Child Care and Development Fund Block Grant. The Block Grant is a key source of federal funding for the Minnesota Child Care Assistance Program, also referred to as CCAP. The way the Block Grant is written, these new requirements apply only to providers participating in CCAP. Therefore, even though your program meets an exclusion from licensure, if you are authorized and participating in CCAP, the Block Grant requirements do apply to you. Almost all of the new requirements need legislative approval before Minnesota can begin making these changes. So even though the Block Grant was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Obama in 2014, Minnesota has not started to make these changes because we don't have the changes made to our state laws that we need. License-exempt centers that are participating in CCAP are currently not required to meet any health and safety requirements. This video presentation is designed to educate license-exempt child care centers that are registered for CCAP about key changes passed by Congress that will impact you. One of the most significant changes DHS is proposing is to require certification for license-exempt centers that participate in CCAP. This certification will be necessary in order to remain eligible for CCAP funding in the future. The video will start with broad information about the Child Care and Development Fund Block Grant, then information about the Block Grant and Minnesota, then specific requirements of the Block Grant relating to health and safety, and finally ending with specific information about the Block Grant and license-exempt child care centers. But first, before we begin, I want to take a moment and acknowledge the important work that you do every day when you care for children entrusted to you by families who live and work in your community. Thank you for your commitment to Minnesota's children. The Child Care and Development Fund, or CCDF, is the primary federal funding source devoted to providing low-income families that are working or participating in education and training with help paying for child care and improving the quality of care for all children. It provides child care financial assistance for 1.4 million children each month throughout the United States, U.S. territories, and tribal nations. A majority of these children are under the age of 5, allowing CCDF to support early childhood education and care for hundreds of thousands of young children. Additionally, CCDF investments in improving the quality of care benefit millions more of the nation's children who do not receive a child care subsidy but participate in child care programs that are benefiting from these quality investments, such as teacher training. On November 19, 2014, President Obama signed bipartisan legislation that comprehensively updated the Child Care and Development Block Grant, CCDBG, for the first time in nearly 20 years. The law made many important statutory changes focused on strengthening child care to better support the success of both parents and children, while also providing a new emphasis on the importance of providing high-quality early education and care for our youngest learners. So what does this mean for child care in Minnesota? The Child Care and Development Block Grant is federal legislation. Currently, many of these required changes only apply to providers participating in the Minnesota Child Care Assistance Program, also known as CCAP. We believe that these federal requirements will benefit all providers. Even though these are federal laws, in Minnesota, we will need legislative authority in order to fully enforce the federal requirements. Therefore, the Department of Human Services is proposing legislation in order for us to meet the federal requirements of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act. Also, Minnesota was required to submit a plan to the federal government to show how we, as a state, plan to comply with the requirements of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act. This plan was already submitted and is available for you to view. You can find a link to it on the DHS website. In Minnesota, the Child Care and Development Block Grant affects 4 main provider groups: licensed child care centers, licensed family child care providers, license-exempt child care centers, specifically those that are registered to serve children who are receiving child care assistance, legally non-licensed providers, specifically those that are registered to serve children who are receiving child care assistance. When reauthorizing the Child Care and Development Block Grant, the federal government focused on 4 key areas: protect the health and safety of children in child care, help parents make informed consumer choices and access information to support child development, support equal access to stable, high-quality child care for low-income children, and enhance the quality of child care and better support the workforce. As the Deputy Inspector General for the Licensing Division, I am here today to share about the focus areas that will impact you from the Licensing Division perspective. Therefore, most of this presentation will be spent talking about the health and safety requirements from the block grant, because these requirements will have the biggest impact from the licensing area. However, I will also discuss the consumer choices area, because licensing is making improvements in this area as well to meet the federal requirements. Keep in mind, the other key focus areas are important and do have requirements for states, but they generally focus on CCAP eligibility for families and other CCAP policies relating to rates and child development training and workforce supports. I will not be spending time on these today because I am sharing from the licensing perspective. We will start with health and safety requirements. There are 4 main areas under the health and safety requirements of the block grant where Minnesota will need to make changes. Specifically, annual inspections, health and safety standards and training requirements associated with those standards, emergency preparedness, and background studies. These changes will impact licensed child care centers, licensed family child care providers, and legally exempt child care providers that are participating in CCAP. As I just stated, the federal health and safety requirements of the block grant are divided into 4 areas. The first one I am going to talk about is the requirement to conduct an inspection every year. Currently, licensed child care centers and many licensed family child care providers are only inspected every 2 years. License-exempt centers enrolled in CCAP are currently not subject to inspections from the state or county at all. The Child Care and Development Block Grant requires states to conduct an initial visit prior to granting a license. Additionally, annual unannounced inspections are required for licensed providers. It also requires states to conduct annual inspections of license-exempt CCAP providers. The block grant also requires that the results of inspections are available electronically and in plain language. Although we do have our licensing information lookup site on our website, we expect to make updates and changes to our postings to meet the additional requirements. And finally, the block grant also requires that licensor caseloads be low enough that every licensed provider and every license-exempt center participating in CCAP can be inspected annually. The Governor's 2017 budget recommendation includes funding to increase the DHS number of licensors and provide grants to counties to help offset the cost of hiring more county licensing staff if the counties are not already doing annual inspections. In addition to annual inspections, the Child Care and Development Block Grant requires states to establish health and safety requirements in 12 different topic areas. For example, preventing sudden unexpected infant death syndrome and the use of safe sleep practices, administering medications, transporting children, and preventing and reporting child abuse and neglect. The federal requirements call for standards or policies and training in each of the 12 health and safety topic areas. Licensed child care providers and license-exempt centers participating in CCAP must receive training before being certified or licensed and ongoing training on such topics. The good news is that Minnesota licensed child care centers and licensed family child care providers already meet many of these requirements through the training you and your staff are required to take now. However, there are some changes being proposed in order to meet the new federal requirements. In addition, for license-exempt centers participating in CCAP, there are currently no state-mandated health and safety training requirements, so all of these trainings will be new for that group of providers. If you participate in the CCAP program, there may be additional health and safety training requirements that you will need to make even before changes are enacted. You will receive a notice about these changes and how to find free or low-cost training to help you meet the new requirements. Again, there are 4 main areas under the health and safety requirements in the block grant where Minnesota will need to make changes. The third area is emergency preparedness. In the chart, you will see that there is a federal requirement for an emergency plan. Our current laws do not meet this requirement, so a change in state law is needed. The federal law requirement is twofold. First, states must address the needs of all children, including the need for safe child care, for the period before, during, and after a state of emergency declared by the governor or a major disaster or emergency. Second, child care providers must have more comprehensive emergency disaster plans, which must include evacuation, relocation, shelter-in-place, and lockdown procedures, procedures for communicating and reunifying children in care with their parents following an emergency. Although we have proposed legislation around meeting these requirements, we have already created 2 documents that are currently available to you on the licensing website. One is Minnesota's statewide child care emergency plan. The other is a resource called Keeping Kids Safe. The Minnesota statewide child care emergency plan is a tool for all involved in the care of children in the management of emergencies. It is for families, providers, state agencies, and local officials. In 2015, DHS convened a work group of state, county, and licensed providers to help review and shape these documents. The Keeping Kids Safe resource is a tool to help child care providers prepare for and respond to emergencies and disasters. In this document, there is a fillable PDF version of the emergency plan. You can find this document on our DHS Child Care Licensing website. If you begin using this form now, you will already meet any new requirements that are being proposed in the 2017 legislative session. Again, there are 4 main areas under the health and safety requirements of the block grant where Minnesota will need to make changes. The 4th area is background study requirements. The Child Care and Development Block Grant enhances background study requirements by requiring states to conduct fingerprint-based FBI national criminal background checks. The federal requirement includes that these background checks are repeated every 5 years. Also, the background check must include a search of National Sex Offender Registry and the Sex Offender Registry and Child and Abuse and Neglect database in any state where the staff member has resided in the last 5 years. The block grant also specifies that staff members, those who care for or supervise children, and those who don't care directly for children but have unsupervised access to children must have these enhanced background studies. Now we are at the point in this video where I will focus in on some of the key changes for licensed exempt centers authorized for CCAP participation. As I mentioned earlier, the new requirements of the block grant apply to Minnesota child care providers receiving CCAP. Therefore, these requirements apply to the license-exempt programs that are eligible to receive CCAP. In the 2017 legislative session, we are proposing legislation for these programs to become certified. If a license-exempt center does not receive CCAP and does not wish to receive CCAP, the center will not need to be certified. In the 2017 legislative session, DHS will propose legislation that will create certification requirements for license-exempt centers participating in the CCAP program. These programs will not be licensed as child care centers, and they will not be subject to all of the Rule 3 standards for child care centers. The proposed requirements for certified programs are the minimum requirements to be in compliance with federal law. They include compliance with the 12 health and safety standards, both policy standards and training, monitoring and inspection requirements, annual announced inspections, background study requirements, other requirements such as staffing, ratio and group size, and reporting of abuse and neglect. If DHS gets approval to require certification for license-exempt centers participating in CCAP, you will be notified about when changes relating to standards and background studies through DHS will take effect. The federal reauthorization of the Child Care and Development Block Grant will require all child care providers and their staff who participate in the CCAP program to have training on 12 critical health and safety topics by September 30th, 2017. On this slide, you see 6 of the health and safety areas in which training will be required: preventing and controlling infectious diseases, including immunizations, preventing sudden unexpected infant death syndrome and the use of safe sleep practices, administering medications, ensuring building and physical premises safety, preventing abusive head trauma, transporting children if children are transported. DHS will notify you when you need to take these trainings to meet the federal requirements. If you participate in the CCAP program, you may be required to take this additional training even before legislative changes are enacted in the 2017 session. You will receive notification from DHS telling you what additional action is required and how to access training that will help you meet the new requirements. On this slide, you see the remaining health and safety topic areas for which training will be required: first aid and CPR, preventing and reporting child abuse and neglect, child development, preventing and responding to allergic reactions, including allergic reactions from food, handling and disposal of bodily fluids, emergency preparedness and response. The DHS Licensing Division is making improvements to its website and updating information to assist you with these changes. Please check each month for updates at the websites listed on this slide: www.parentaware.org, mn.gov/licensing/child-care, mn.gov/DHS/licensing/family-child-care, mn.gov/DHS/licensing/child-care-centers, https://mn.gov/general-public/background-studies. Thank you for taking the time to view this video. We hope it provides you with useful information.